your host, Sean Lynn, in the pub for a Dram with friends, where we talk about faith, family, food, and fun. Pull up a chair and I'll pour you a drink. Episode 52. We are extremely excited to welcome my good friend John Paul into the pub today. John will talk about how he led his family down to Mexico to build houses for the poor. I hope you are enjoying this content. Please like and subscribe, share with a friend. Also, go to GodSquad.ca where you can pray with us and for us, and consider donating so that we can continue our mission, reaching men wherever they're at. Thank you as we begin our episode. I am extremely happy to welcome my good friend John Paul into the pub today. Welcome, John.
Thanks, Sean.
John is a board member with our GodSquad team and longtime friend, and I've poured him a Quiet Man 8-year-old Irish whiskey. So, because we're older guys, I don't know if we'll live up to the quiet guy, but St. Joseph definitely represents the quiet man. So, and he's a friend of both of ours. And if you want to know more about him, you can ask us.
Absolutely.
So, John, for our friends in the pub, who is John Paul?
John Paul is a happily married man of how many years now? 38 years, Whoa. Going on 39 years. To my wife, Harriet. I have 8 kids. And by Easter, I'll have 13 grandchildren fully delivered.
He just has to outdo me at every step, because I'm about to celebrate 37, and we're going to have our 12th in January. So he always has to stay one step ahead of me.
Yeah, we're trying hard. I keep encouraging my kids. It's time again for one more grandchild.
Yes. Well, we had a 8-year break between number 3 and 4, so that's only the oldest 3. So we might have a chance of catching up at some point. So
you may actually exceed us.
We never know what the Lord has planned, and we are thankful for what we have, and that's where being a grandfather is a good thing. And I'm getting ready to go on the road to go see mine finally after 2.5 years down in the States. So I'm really excited. So.
Yeah, I cheer that you're going, because it's definitely time you've been allowed to.
Yes. And so what, we got to know each other through the church and mutual friends coming to the GodSquad conference. And one of the things that you've done to try and encourage young people is build houses in Mexico. How did you get started doing that?
The very first trip I did was when my oldest son was 13 years old, and it was actually the police retreat society that had organized the trip. They had some extra slots, so they did a presentation to the youth group at church. And at the time, my oldest was just entering into his teen years, and he's always been a good kid, but you were still seeing the influences of the material world and the mindset of teenagers with respect to they tend to focus on what their friends view as important versus what I guess our faith says is important. And I thought a trip like this to see what a good part of the world lives like was going to be pretty important for them. And so we signed up for that very first trip, and the rest is history. I've been on about 20 trips now, or more. I can't remember how many. It's been well over 20 years now. And every one of my kids has gone multiple times. And I think it's had a huge impact on their lives. That's ultimately what it boils down to. It takes them away from the focus on when they have an understanding of what a huge portion of the world lives like. It takes the focus on away from how is my life imperfect versus how blessed I am in my life in Canada here. And they forget about needing those $200 Nikes or those, $500 blue jeans.
Yeah, they don't quite seem as important because you've taken me down to Mexico there, and it is a different world. Like, it's just a different world. You were telling us the story about building the house for the guy that calls you El Jefe. And, oh man, the phone rings in the pub just about every show I record lately. But you were saying that his dad was in tears because it took him a lifetime to just get the little house that he had.
Yeah, we built a house for a fellow by the name of Enrique. He was a recovered drug addict and alcoholic, and he was one of the groundskeepers working at the monastery where we ultimately built a soup kitchen for. And we built a house for him and his family. He has a wife and 2 boys, and we built the house on a land just adjacent to his father's house. And his father had been a long haul trucker. He was very fortunate as far as one of the Mexican people are in that he was able to get a passport when he was younger. And he used to drive truck up through Mexico and the U.S. and actually made a decent living. He built himself a house for himself and his wife and his kids, and did reasonably well for himself relative to Mexican standards. But it basically took him a lifetime of work in order to build his house. And he was late 70s at the time, and the house we built for Enrique to allow his 2 grandsons to move next door to him, basically. He was in tears, as Sean said. He was in tears, and he basically said, "Mr. John, I can't believe it. I worked 42 years to build my house, and in a week you built my son a house." And that was just, it really touched me, because it really gave me a sense of the struggle these people face every day in their poverty. And it was life-changing for me, never mind my kids.
And that's where you talk about counting your blessings or just realizing what we have and what we're gifted. And sometimes it's easy to lose focus of that as we continue to focus on how bad things are for us, which compared to, like you say, most of the world, it's not bad at all. Because I've worked with youth at risk who have come from the Sudan as refugees and stuff like that, and you going into their houses and their lives, you realize just how blessed you are, right?
How blessed you are, and even how blessed they are to be here now.
Yeah.
Relative to where they were. And that was one of the things that has really been emphasized a number of times. I remember building a house for another young family down in Mexico. It was a mother, father, and a daughter. And the daughter was only about 3 or 4 years old. And when we finished the house and turned the key over to the family, they had a fiesta for us, and it was a big financial outlay for them, because really they've saved for years to do what we gave them in a week, and they wanted to make it special for us, and they had invited the wife's mother and father and the wife's grandparents. And through the translator, the grandparents came up to me and they said, you know, they were all thankful for the house. And he described to me that he had worked his whole life, 40, 50 some years, in order to, and the great grandparents were probably in their 80s. And he said he had worked his whole life for as long as he could work to save the money to make a down payment on the land. And the grandparents, the mother and father of the daughter we built the house for, had worked their whole lives to pay the mortgage off on the land. And they had expected the mom and dad to have to work their whole lives to afford to build some kind of structure on their house, on their land, for their daughter to use someday with her husband. And by doing what we did, it sort of skipped a generation, but they were all in tears and all very grateful. And it was just amazing. And the total cost of the house and the total cost of the land, for that matter, I think the land had cost $1,200. Wow. But it took the equivalent of $1,200 US, but it took a couple working their whole lives to make enough to make to save for the down payment on that land, and then another couple their whole lives to pay the land cost off. And the house we built them probably cost, because it was all volunteer labor and it was just materials, it probably cost maybe $5,000 to build at most. And when you look at that, for an outlay of $7,500, it would have taken 3 full generations to pay off. And that's hard to put in perspective.
Yeah.
I mean, if people looked at how much they spend on Starbucks or McDonald's in a year, and just added all your fast food up for a year, do you think you would have spent close to $7,500? Given the price of a meal at one of those places now? Probably really quick.
Yeah, well, and I remember I was helping out, this was years ago, helping out when they were doing the Bishop's Appeal at the time.
Yeah.
And the average gift, and I don't know how they were coming to the average, but whether they were counting every Catholic in the diocese but it was like $25.
Yeah.
And I said, that's going to McDonald's once, right?
Yeah.
And that's where we've got to be generous with what we have, whether it's just cooking for somebody, if that's your gift talent, and sharing a meal with a mom that just had a baby, or, you know, like there are people in need in our city. You don't have to go to Mexico or around the world if that's not your calling. So you obviously have been called to do what you've done in Mexico. I'm very confident of that, just given what's happened and what I've witnessed over the years.
It wasn't my intent, but somehow that's how it worked out. God has amazing plans for all of us, and if you just open your mind and your heart to what He's asking you to do, the decision becomes pretty clear. And if you make the wrong decision, you're not going to feel good about it. Doesn't mean you can't change it, but He will provide additional opportunities down the road to do something else. So reach out a little bit.
Yeah.
Stretch yourself a little bit. That's what it takes. So
with 8 kids, John, I'm guessing you've perfected a meal or two. What is your go-to meal, your the one that keeps the kids coming home for
Yeah, it's not me doing most of that cooking. I like to smoke meat on the smoker and barbecue. So, when the kids do come home, it's burgers and it's roasts on the smoker, whether it's pork roast or beef roast, and the odd brisket. I've tried to imitate your brisket; it hasn't worked yet, but I'm working on it.
Never give up, never surrender.
Yes, exactly.
So keep practicing, and that's what we need to do, and no matter what it is in life, like you talk about, you might be going down the wrong path. And I just was giving this speech to 2 young men today. I work in a high school, and we had a hectic week with a stabbing and fights, and so just trying to tell them that at what point does it stop? Like, if this person had made a different choice, this wouldn't have happened. Had this person made a different choice, this would, like, it just keeps going. And the only person that can stop this is you as an individual making a different choice.
That's right.
So,
and it is all about choices, and it's all about trying to make the right choice. But one of the greatest beauties we have in our faith is the sacrament of reconciliation, of confession. And when you do make a mistake, I urge you, go to confession, get right with God, and then ask how you can do better and how you can answer his call for your life, because he has an amazing plan. One of the things you always like to say is God loves you and he has a plan for your life.
Yep.
And it is so true. You might not like the plan
or understand
the plan, but the other thing that God will give you is the graces to fulfill the plan. If it's truly God's will, he will give you the graces to make it work.
So one of the questions I asked John is, a lot of young men are struggling, even what a man is today. What advice do you give your 18-year-old self?
My 18-year-old self probably wouldn't listen to anything. That was the issue. And I think the reality of there's a lot of lip service that can happen when you're a teenager. You follow the rules of your family and your parents until you become independent on your own. And then you're making those decisions on your own. And you can do lots of things. And one of the messages I've always tried to tell my kids is, I want to help you till you're an adult and can make your own decisions, to not make a bad decision that's going to impact the rest of your life. If you can get your kids to that point where they're an adult and teach them one other thing, that no matter what they do, there's going to be a consequence. And they should always look at what the consequence would be. And I think that's what I've tried to do more than anything. I don't know, what have you done with your kids?
Well, it's funny you bring up that, because I've used that line a number of times, including today with the young men, where a story I tell them is my son, Tim, or TJ, was going down to meet his girlfriend, now wife's parents. And so he was flying down and got pulled out of line because he hadn't paid his student visa. We didn't know that you had to pay a student visa to go to school in the States. So,
right.
Anyhow, he goes, Dad, I was okay because they were going to book me the next flight. And yeah, it's a hiccup. But he said, I really felt sorry for the two other guys. One guy had a warrant for a stupid traffic ticket, but the flight he missed was the only one going to Alaska for the month for his work. And then the other guy was in his 50s, was taking his wife on a cruise, and they weren't letting him into the U.S. because of something he did when he was 18.
Right.
And that's what people don't realize, is the permanence of some of your actions. I know people that have to apply and spend like $500 just to fly to the States, even though they've been pardoned by Canada and forgiven. And
yep.
other countries don't have to forgive you.
No.
and like, to make it real, taking your kids to Disneyland one time. Imagine not being able to do that.
Yeah.
Ever.
Ever.
So, because of something you did when you were 18. So, just realize the true consequences of your actions. And it's hard to control them at times.
Yeah.
So, the other question...
And actually try and discern what is really important.
Yeah.
I know there's certainly been some issues with, even people wanting to go to church and wanting to object to the current mask rules.
Yeah.
I find masks just as uncomfortable as anybody else. But when I look at the rules, you have to follow the rules. And you want to fight that battle, fight the battle, but what's more important, not wearing a mask or not receiving the Eucharist? And in my mind, there's no contest. I want to go to Mass, I want to receive the Eucharist, so I'm going to wear a mask, period.
Amen to that, brother. and one of the other things I talk to them about is what are their hopes, dreams, goals, and aspirations. And like a kid talked about, he wanted to be a computer programmer. So right. I said, okay, now imagine you need to pick a team of people to help you get there. How many of the guys that you're hanging with today are you going to pick for that team to help you achieve your goals? Because they can picture picking teams for basketball and everything else, and they know that some of these people are not looking out for their best interests. So,
well, and that's the amazing thing about youth, and I was there when I was their age, so I'm not being critical about it. It's just they want to hang with kids that are popular, that are sort of the leaders of the crowd, if you want to call it that. They want to be dragged. If they're not the leader themselves, they want to be dragged along with the leaders. And those leaders are not necessarily focused in the right direction. They're not focused with an eye to what's really important in life. And I'm not sure that ever really kicks in until something really momentous in your life happens. And probably the first momentous event in my life happened not when I was 18, not when I was 20, when I was 24, when I got married to my wife. And you realize with awe that your world has changed. And then the second biggest momentous thing happened with the birth of my first child. And then you realize, wow, this is something unbelievable. And I just re-experienced this, in the last week with one of my sons. He got married a couple of years ago, and they just had their very first baby, and just brought him home from the hospital. And they're both just stunned. They're both in awe that this little baby is a creation of their love.
Yeah.
And it's hard to believe. And I had a real deja vu moment because they were getting ready to bring the baby out. And they had the baby laying out on the couch with a sleeper beside him. And they're both standing there sort of looking, saying, what do we do next? and I remember my wife Harriet and I did exactly the same thing some 34 years ago. It was hilarious.
That's awesome. So you know Jeff Cavins and we riding with your posse. So who are your go-to saints? Who are the ones that you call on a daily or weekly basis?
St. Joseph for sure. And I think the most important saint to me is probably St. John Paul II. I have an immense respect for him. And the more I get into his readings, his encyclicals, and certainly Humanae Vitae, I just realize how brilliant he was and how visionary he was in putting those encyclicals out in a time when we most needed it. And it's it's a guide for our future. I mean, we have to move in the direction. And he predicted all these attacks were coming, and long before they ever started. And our faith is under attack today, and I get a lot of comfort from his readings. And so I would say that's
Well, and the hope that he inspired the new springtime.
yes,
So it was Pope Paul VI that published Humanae Vitae, but there's a lot that figure that John Paul helped craft
Yes,
it.
yes.
So he's the
Like-
most prolific pope when it comes to writing
yeah.
encyclicals. Well, I want to thank you for taking time to visit us in the pub today. Don't know, I think you know, because I've told you. The word whiskey comes from a Gaelic word called Ishkabaha, which means water of life. And I pray that you continue to lead many souls to the true water of life.
You too, Sean. We'll see ya.
I hope you have enjoyed this episode of A Dram with Friends. Like and subscribe. Go to all podcast platforms to look for it on podcast, or go to GodSquad.ca to support our mission.